The servitor started crying at 3:47, station time. Tech Priest Vol noticed it first during routine maintenance checks in the manufacturum's lower levels. Unit 7743 Sigma was stationed at Assembly Line 12, performing the same task it had performed for the past 37 years. Welding joints on munitions casings. Simple, repetitive, the kind of work that didn't require conscious thought, which was good, because servitors didn't have much consciousness left. But 7743 Sigma was crying. Actual tears running down what remained of its face. The biological components, the parts that had once been human, were malfunctioning in a way Vol had never seen before. The servitors' mechadendrites continued their work. Perfectly synchronized. Welding torch moving with mechanical precision. The programming was intact. The machine parts functioned flawlessly. But the human parts were breaking down. And that breakdown was expressing itself in the worst possible way. The servitor was remembering. "Please," it whispered between welds. The voice was barely audible over the manufacturum's noise. Hoarse, damaged, but unmistakably human. "Please, I had a daughter. Her name was Mira. Is she? Does anyone know if she's?" Vol froze. This shouldn't be possible. Servitor lobotomization was supposed to be permanent. Memories erased. Personality suppressed. The criminal or volunteer or unfortunate soul who'd been converted into Unit 7743 Sigma should have been gone forever, replaced by an organic automaton that couldn't think or feel or remember. But something had failed. Some aspect of the psychosurgery had degraded after decades of operation. And now the human underneath was surfacing, aware of what had been done to it, aware of what it had become. Unit 7743 Sigma, Vol said carefully. "You are experiencing a malfunction. Remain at your station. Maintenance will be scheduled." "I can't move." The servitor's mechadendrites kept working. But its remaining human eye focused on Vol with desperate clarity. "I can't stop. I've been welding these same joints for... How long? How long have I been here? What year is it? You are experiencing memory corruption. Your statements are illogical. You are a servitor. You do not have memories prior to your conversion. But I do. I remember. I was Jacob. I stole food. They said it was theft. They said I'd be converted for the crime. I thought they meant prison labor. Not this. Not becoming this." Vol's mechadendrites twitched, an unconscious response that his remaining biological components sometimes exhibited under stress. He'd been a tech priest for 97 years, had overseen servitor maintenance for most of that time, had processed thousands of malfunctions, but he'd never dealt with one that remembered being human. "Your designation is 7743 Sigma. You are Imperial property. You serve the Omnicia through labor. Your previous existence is irrelevant." "My daughter," the servitor's voice cracked. "She was 7 years old when they took me. She's not 7 anymore, is she? How old is she now? Is she even alive?" Vol checked his chronometer. The servitor had been in operation for 37 years. The daughter, if she'd existed, would be 44 now, assuming she'd survived. Assuming she hadn't starved after her father was removed from the family unit. Assuming the administratum hadn't just processed her into servitor status too. "I don't have that information," Vol said, which was true, but also irrelevant. Because whether the daughter lived or died didn't change the servitor situation, didn't change what needed to happen next. "Please," 7743 Sigma begged. "Please just tell me she's okay. That's all I need. Just tell me my daughter survived. That she had a life. That my crime didn't destroy her too." Vol could have lied. Could have said, "Yes, your daughter is fine. She grew up healthy and happy." It would have been a kindness. Would have given this malfunctioning servitor some peace before its final shutdown. But tech priests didn't deal in kindness. They dealt in efficiency. "You are scheduled for decommissioning," Vol said. "Report to Processing Bay 7 for termination and recycling. Your useful service period has concluded." The servitor's crying intensified, but its mechadendrites kept working. kept welding joints with perfect mechanical precision even as the human components broke down completely. That's what happened when servitors malfunctioned. When the lobotomization failed. When the human underneath started surfacing. When the organic parts remembered what they used to be. They got recycled. Terminated. Their biological components stripped for whatever useful material remained. Their mechanical parts cleaned and reused in newer servitor conversions. Nothing was wasted in the Imperium. Not even the broken remnants of people who'd been turned into machines. This is the story nobody wants to hear. The fate of servitors when they stop functioning properly. Before we go deeper into this nightmare, I need you to answer something in the comments. If you were turned into a servitor and then started remembering who you used to be, started becoming aware of what had been done to you, would you want someone to lie to you about your old life? Or would you want the truth, no matter how terrible? Drop your answer. Let's see who actually understands what mercy means when you're already damned. Now let me show you what really happens to servitors when they break. What the Mechanicus does with them. And why the answer is somehow worse than just shutting them down. Processing Bay 7 smelled like burnt meat and machine oil. Servitor 7743 Sigma stood in the designated termination zone, its mechadendrites finally still. The programming had released it from work duty, had allowed it to stop welding, had given it permission to move to this place where malfunctioning units were processed. Around it stood 17 other servitors, all showing signs of critical malfunction. One had a combat chassis, looked like it had been a penal legion soldier before conversion. Its weapon arms hung limply, neural connections severed by time and wear. Another was so old its biological components had calcified. The flesh had literally turned to stone from mineral deposits in the manufacturum's atmosphere. A third servitor was screaming, had been screaming for 6 hours straight, according to the processing logs. Its lobotomization had failed catastrophically. Full memory restoration, complete awareness. It knew what it was, knew what had been done, and it was screaming because that's all its modified vocal cords could do anymore. Tech Priest Vol entered the bay accompanied by 2 servoskulls and a processing servitor, a specialized unit designed specifically for decommissioning other servitors. There was a grim irony in that. Servitors whose job was to disassemble their own kind. Machines made from humans processing other machines made from humans. Malfunctioning units. Vol announced through his Vox grill. You are being decommissioned due to operational failure. Your service to the Omnicia is acknowledged. You will be processed according to Protocol Fate 9. Biological components suitable for reclamation will be harvested. Mechanical components will be cleaned and redistributed. Remain stationary during processing. The servitors didn't respond. Couldn't respond, most of them. Their programming kept them obedient even as their organic parts screamed for escape, even as whatever remained of their human consciousness begged for this to stop. Unit 7743 Sigma. Jacob, he'd said his name was, tried to speak. Please, I just want to know about my daughter. Just tell me if she's okay. That's all. Then you can do whatever you need to do. Vol paused. He wasn't supposed to engage with malfunctioning servitors. Protocol was clear. Acknowledge the malfunction, proceed with decommissioning. Don't encourage the delusion that these were still people deserving of conversation. But something about 7743 Sigma's desperation penetrated even Vol's heavily modified consciousness. He accessed the administratum records. Searched for families of individuals converted to servitor status in the year 7743 Sigma had been processed. Found the file. Read it. Felt something approximating regret in the small part of his brain that remained organic. Your daughter was processed 6 months after your conversion, Vol said flatly. Minor theft. Same crime. She was 8 years old. Insufficient age for labor servitor conversion. She was processed into corpse starch to feed other workers. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the screaming servitor went quiet. 7743 Sigma's remaining human eye stared at Vol with an expression that combined horror, grief, and something that might have been relief. Relief that at least there was an answer. That the not knowing was over. Thank you. it whispered, "for telling me, even though, thank you." Then its biological components began shutting down. Not from the decommissioning, Vol hadn't started that yet, but from shock. From the organic systems simply giving up. Deciding that existence wasn't worth continuing after that revelation. The mechadendrites spasmed once, twice, then went still. Unit 7743 Sigma was dead before Vol could begin the official processing procedure, which complicated things, because Protocol Theta 9 required specific sequencing, required the servitor to be alive or at least biological components functional during the initial stages of disassembly. Dead servitors were harder to process. The organs degraded quickly. The mechanical components became contaminated by decay products. Note for record, Vol voxed to his servoskulls. Unit 7743 Sigma experienced catastrophic biological shutdown prior to scheduled decommissioning. Cause: information trauma resulting in systemic failure. Recommendation: future malfunctioning units should not be provided with historical data regarding their pre-conversion existence. It was a clinical observation. Emotionless. Exactly what the Mechanicus expected. But somewhere in the small biological portion of Vol's brain, the part the Mechanicus hadn't yet replaced with cogitators and data processors, something stirred. A question he wasn't supposed to ask. A doubt he wasn't supposed to feel. Had telling 7743 Sigma the truth been mercy or cruelty? Was it better to die knowing, or better to die still hoping? Vol suppressed the thought. Questions like that led to inefficiency, led to hesitation, led to the kind of philosophical uncertainty that had no place in the cult Mechanicus. He activated the processing servitor, watched it begin dismantling Unit 7743 Sigma's remains. Biological components separated from mechanical. Useful materials salvaged. Waste products designated for recycling. Within 3 hours, there was nothing left of Jacob except a few kilograms of usable meat, some recyclable augmetics, and a notation in the decommissioning logs. Unit 7743 Sigma had served the Omnicia for 37 years. Now it served by being broken down into components that would create or maintain other servitors. Other machines made from humans. Other consciousness trapped in mechanical bodies, performing labor until they too malfunctioned and were processed. The cycle continued, as it always had, as it always would. Not all servitor malfunctions were the same. Tech Priest Vol had categorized them over his decades of maintenance work. Had developed an unofficial classification system that the Mechanicus would never approve of because it implied servitors were complex enough to fail in interesting ways. Mechanical failure, the most common. Something in the augmetics broke down. A servo seized. A data port corroded. Power cell depleted. These were straightforward. Replace the broken component or, if the servitor was too old to justify repair costs, decommission and harvest whatever still worked. Biological degradation, almost as common. The organic parts wore out. Hearts failed. Lungs collapsed. Organs that had been working for decades simply gave up. These servitors usually died before processing, which made them slightly less valuable. Dead organic material was harder to reclaim than living tissue. Programming corruption. Rare but problematic. Something in the behavioral conditioning failed. The servitor stopped following commands. Started performing tasks incorrectly. Sometimes became violent. These required immediate decommissioning because a malfunctioning combat servitor could kill dozens of workers before being shut down. Memory restoration. The rarest. The worst. The kind that made even tech priests uncomfortable. When the lobotomization degraded. When the psychosurgery that was supposed to be permanent started failing. When the human underneath began surfacing. These were the ones that cried. The ones that begged. The ones that remembered having names and families and lives before the conversion. The ones like Unit 7743 Sigma. Vol had processed 43 Category 4 malfunctions in his 97 years of service. Each one different. Each one uniquely horrifying in its own way. Unit 2447 Delta had been a woman. had been convicted of heresy for questioning the ecclesiarchy's teachings. She'd served as a maintenance servitor for 62 years before the memories returned. Hadn't begged for information about her family. Had just repeated the same prayer over and over. A prayer to the emperor. The same prayer that had gotten her convicted of heresy because she'd recited it incorrectly. She died still praying. Still hoping the emperor would hear her. Still believing that faith mattered even after what the Imperium had done to her. Unit 8891 Kappa had been a child. 10 years old when converted. Crime being an orphan in an overcrowded hive. The administratum had decided orphans were inefficient. Better to convert them into servitors than let them consume resources without contributing labor. When 8891, Kappa's memories returned, all it could remember was being scared. Didn't remember parents, had never had any. Just remembered cold and hunger and then pain. So much pain during the conversion process. And then nothing for 70 years until the lobotomization failed and the fear came back. Vol had that one decommissioned quickly. Hadn't asked questions. Hadn't provided information. Just shut it down as fast as protocol allowed. Because listening to a child's mind trapped in a servitor body was too much even for his heavily modified consciousness. Unit 5523 Omega had been a soldier. A guardsman who'd survived 15 years of combat. Had been declared unfit for further service due to psychological trauma. Rather than provide treatment or retirement, the administratum had converted him. Turned a traumatized warrior into a labor servitor carrying ammunition boxes in a manufactorum. When his memories returned, he'd started trying to escape. Had actually broken free from his station and made it 300 meters before security servitors caught him. They'd brought him to Processing Bay 7 still fighting. Still trying to run. Still convinced he was behind enemy lines and needed to rejoin his regiment. Vol had been forced to have him physically restrained during decommissioning. The soldier had died thinking he was being tortured by enemies. Had never understood that the Imperium he'd served, the Imperium he'd fought for, was the thing killing him. These memories haunted Vol in ways he wasn't supposed to be haunted. Tech priests were supposed to be beyond emotional attachment. Supposed to view servitors as tools rather than beings. But Vol couldn't quite manage that. Couldn't quite suppress the awareness that each servitor had been human once. That somewhere in those partially organic machines were the remnants of people who'd never agreed to become machines. Who'd been forced into this existence by an Imperium that viewed human bodies as just another resource to be exploited. What happened to servitors after decommissioning depended entirely on what components were still functional. In Processing Bay 7's lower levels, Vol oversaw the actual breakdown process. It was methodical, efficient, designed to extract maximum value from each decommissioned unit. Mechanical extraction. The augmetic components were removed first. Servoarms, replacement limbs, optical implants, neural jacks, data ports, anything that had been grafted onto the original human body during conversion. These parts were valuable, could be cleaned, blessed with sacred oils, reconsecrated to the Omnicia, and reused in new servitor conversions. A combat servitor's weapon arms might be transferred to a fresh conversion. A labor servitor's carrying mechanisms could be installed in a different unit. The Mechanicus wasted nothing. A single set of augmetics might serve in a dozen different servitors over centuries of continuous recycling and redistribution. Viable organ harvest. If the servitor had died recently enough that its organic components were still fresh, certain organs could be harvested. Hearts, lungs, kidneys, livers. Not for transplant into living humans, that would be inefficient use of resources, but for installation in new servitor conversions. Why grow organs in vats when you could just recycle functional ones from decommissioned units? Why waste biological material when it could be repurposed? Some servitors were made entirely from recycled parts. A heart from one decommissioned unit. Lungs from another. Kidneys from a third. Biological components stitched together from a dozen different humans, animated through augmetics and behavioral programming, sent out to labor until they too broke down and were harvested for parts. Biomass reclamation. Whatever organic material remained, The parts too damaged to reuse as organs but still biologically viable, was processed into nutrient paste. Corpse starch, the standard food product distributed to hive workers across the Imperium. The Administratum's official documentation never mentioned that corpse starch included recycled servitor parts. That would have been inefficient information to share. Better for workers to not know they were eating their own kind. Better to maintain the fiction that corpse starch was just synthesized protein rather than literally the processed remains of humans. Industrial materials. The final stage. Anything left over, bones, hair, fingernails, waste products from the biomass processing, was ground down and converted into industrial materials. Fertilizer for agricultural zones. Binding agents for concrete. Carbon compounds for manufacturing processes. Absolutely nothing was wasted. A human body could be converted into 15 to 20 different product categories. Could serve the Imperium in death even more efficiently than in life. Vol oversaw this entire process for every decommissioned servitor. Watched as people, because that's what they'd been once, were methodically broken down into component parts and redistributed throughout the Imperium's vast industrial machine. It should have bothered him more than it did. Should have registered as horrific. But 97 years as a tech priest had dulled those responses. Had trained him to view this as just another logistical procedure rather than the systematic desecration of human remains. Most days, he succeeded in maintaining that clinical detachment. But some days like today, when he'd watched Unit 7743 Sigma die from the shock of learning its daughter had been rendered into food, Vol couldn't quite suppress the awareness that what he was doing was monstrous. That the Imperium's efficiency was built on horror. That treating humans as just another resource wasn't pragmatic policy but systematic evil. That maybe, possibly, the Mechanicus's focus on logic and efficiency had blinded them to the moral implications of what they were doing. These thoughts were dangerous, were heretical by most Mechanicus standards, were exactly the kind of philosophical uncertainty that led tech priests to malfunction just like servitors. So Vol suppressed them, forced his attention back to the processing procedures, watched as Unit 7743 Sigma's remains were methodically converted into usable materials. The augmetics were cleaned and stored for future use. The organs were too degraded from shock to harvest. The biomass was processed into 3 kilograms of corpse starch that would feed workers in the manufacturer's cafeteria. The bones were ground into fertilizer supplement. By the end of the day, there was no physical evidence that Jacob had ever existed. No marker, no memorial, just some mechanical components in storage and organic material being redistributed through the Imperium supply chains. That's what happened to servitors when they broke. They stopped being even the mockery of a person they'd been as a servitor. They became raw materials, returned to the system that had created them in the first place. The cycle was complete. And tomorrow, Vol would process more malfunctioning units. And the day after that. And the day after that. An endless stream of broken servitors being broken down further. Forever. Or at least until Vol himself malfunctioned. Until his organic components degraded beyond the Mechanicus's ability to maintain them. Until he became the one being processed instead of the one doing the processing. That day would come eventually. Came for everyone. Even tech priests weren't immortal. And when it came, Vol wondered if he'd remember this. Remember the servitors he'd decommissioned. Remember their pleas and cries and desperate final moments of awareness. Or if the Mechanicus would wipe those memories. Would lobotomize him just enough to remove the trauma while keeping his useful technical knowledge. Would turn him into something like a servitor himself. Functional but stripped of whatever made him himself. He suspected the latter. Because that's what the Mechanicus did. That's what the Imperium did. It broke you down and rebuilt you into something useful. And when you stopped being useful, it broke you down again and recycled the parts. Nothing was wasted. No one was exempt. Everyone served until they couldn't serve anymore. And then they served one final time by being rendered into materials for others to use. Not all malfunctioning servitors were decommissioned. Vol discovered this by accident during a routine inspection of the Mechanicus. Forge Temple's deeper levels. areas where only the highest-ranking tech priests were supposed to venture. But Vol had been granted expanded access after 97 years of loyal service. Had been trusted with secrets the average tech priest never learned. He wished they hadn't trusted him, because what he found in those deeper levels was worse than all the decommissioning he'd overseen. Preservation Chamber Omega was unmarked, hidden behind a biometric lock that required Vol's specific genetic signature to access. Inside were rows of stasis tanks, each containing a servitor. But these weren't being stored for parts. These were being kept alive, maintained in suspended animation, preserved indefinitely rather than being processed. Vol checked the designations. His breath caught the closest approximation his heavily modified lungs could manage when he recognized several units. Unit 7734 Alpha, a servitor that had malfunctioned 15 years ago. Vol had processed the paperwork himself, had scheduled it for decommissioning, had assumed it had been broken down like all the others. But here it was, alive, suspended, its organic components perfectly preserved, its augmetics gleaming with careful maintenance. Vol accessed the chamber's data logs, felt something cold settle in the part of his chest where a normal human's heart would have been. These servitors were being preserved because their malfunctions were valuable. Because when servitors started remembering their previous lives, when the lobotomization failed and human consciousness resurfaced, the Mechanicus could study them, could analyze what had gone wrong, could use that information to improve future conversion processes. The servitors weren't being kept alive out of mercy. They were being kept alive as research specimens, as examples of failure that could be studied to prevent future failures. And they were conscious. The stasis didn't shut down their awareness, just their ability to move or speak or do anything except exist in frozen horror, forever aware of what they'd become and unable to do anything about it. Vol approached the closest tank. Unit 7734, Alpha's remaining human eye was open, focused on him with desperate intensity, begging without words for this to stop, for someone to please just let it die instead of being preserved like this. Omnicia, preserve me, Vol whispered. The prayer felt hollow, because the Omnicia wasn't preserving these servitors out of compassion. The Omnicia, or at least the Mechanicus claiming to serve the Omnicia, was preserving them as specimens, as tools for improving the very process that had created them. A voice spoke from behind him. Tech Priest Vol, you have discovered one of our more sensitive research projects. Vol turned. Muggos Explorator Crane stood in the chamber entrance. Ancient, powerful, one of the senior-most members of the Forge Temple's leadership. Someone Vol couldn't refuse or question without facing severe consequences. Muggos, Vol said carefully, I was conducting routine inspections. I did not mean to intrude on classified research. You are not intruding. Your security clearance grants you access. I simply did not expect you to utilize that access so soon. Crane moved into the chamber, mechadendrites gesturing at the stasis tanks. Tell me, Tech Priest, what do you see here? Preserved servitors. Units that experienced catastrophic malfunction. Memory restoration. Lobotomization failure. Correct. And what is their purpose? Vol considered lying. Considered pretending he didn't understand. But Crane would detect the deception. And lying to a Muggos was grounds for immediate demotion. Research specimens. You're studying the malfunction, trying to understand why the lobotomization fails so you can improve the process. Precisely. These units represent valuable data. Each one demonstrates a different failure mode. Different pathways through which human consciousness can resurface despite our best efforts to suppress it. Crane approached one of the tanks. Unit 7734 Alpha, for example, experienced partial memory restoration. Remembers sensory experiences but not cognitive context. Can recall what things felt like but not what they meant. Fascinating variation. Are they aware? Right now? Can they think? Yes, that is necessary for proper study. We must observe how the restored consciousness interacts with the servitor programming. How the human mind attempts to reassert control over a body that no longer fully responds to human will. That sounds like torture. Crane's remaining human eye fixed on Vol. It sounds like science. These units are providing valuable data that will improve millions of future conversions. Their suffering, if we accept that term, serves the Omnissia's greater purpose. But their people, are still partially people. We're keeping them alive in stasis just to study how much psychological damage they can endure before. They are servitors, Crane interrupted sharply. Imperial property. Tools that have malfunctioned. We are extracting residual value from those tools before final decommissioning. Nothing more. When will they be decommissioned? When we have learned everything useful from observing them. Some have been in stasis for decades. Some may remain for decades more. Time is irrelevant to research. Vol looked at the rows of tanks. Dozens of servitors. All conscious. All aware. All trapped in suspended animation while the Mechanicus studied their suffering like it was just another dataset. This is wrong, he said quietly. Wrong. Crane's Vox grill emitted something that might have been laughter. Wrong implies moral judgment. The Mechanicus does not operate on morality. We operate on efficiency. These servitors are being utilized efficiently. Therefore, this process is correct. But they're suffering. Experiencing continuous psychological trauma. We could at least shut down their consciousness. Let them be unaware while we study their physical symptoms. That would contaminate the data. We need to observe conscious response to the malfunction. Need to understand how human minds react when they become aware of their servitor status. That information is invaluable for designing future psychological conditioning. Vol felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Something the Mechanicus had tried to purge from his consciousness through augmentation and indoctrination. Something that had no place in efficient service to the Omnissia. Disgust. Moral disgust. The kind that came from recognizing evil even when that evil was dressed up as scientific progress. I understand, he lied. Thank you for explaining the research, Muggos. I will return to my regular duties. See that you do. And Tech Priest? What you have seen in this chamber is classified. You will not discuss it with anyone lacking appropriate clearance. Failure to maintain information security will result in immediate processing into servitor status yourself. Do you understand? Yes, Muggos. Vol left the chamber, returned to processing Bay 7, resumed his regular duties decommissioning malfunctioning servitors. But something had changed. He couldn't stop thinking about those stasis tanks. About the servitors preserved in conscious awareness. About the fact that when he processed malfunctioning units, he was potentially saving them from something worse than death. From being preserved as research specimens. From spending decades trapped in frozen horror while the Mechanicus studied how much a human mind could endure. Maybe decommissioning them quickly was mercy after all. Maybe turning them into corpse starch and fertilizer was kinder than what the Mechanicus did to the special cases. Or maybe, probably, there was no mercy in any of this. Maybe the entire system was just layers of horror stacked on top of each other. And the only difference was which specific horror you experienced. Vol processed 3 more servitors that day. Moved through the procedures mechanically. Tried not to think about where they might have ended up if he hadn't processed them. If someone like Muggos Crane had decided they were interesting enough to preserve, he told himself he was doing them a favor, giving them quick deaths instead of prolonged suffering, turning them into usable materials instead of research specimens. It was a comfortable lie, and Vol clung to it, because the alternative, acknowledging that there were no good choices, that every option was just a different flavor of horror, was too much for even his heavily modified consciousness to bear. Chapter 5. The Aware Ones. 3 weeks after discovering Preservation Chamber Omega, Vol received an unusual request. A servitor in the upper manufacturum levels was malfunctioning. Not mechanically, not biologically, but behaviorally. It was still performing its assigned tasks, still following commands, still functioning within acceptable parameters. But it was talking, coherently, in ways servitors weren't supposed to be capable of. Vol found Unit 9821 Theta at its station. A simple cargo loading servitor. Modified human body with enhanced strength and carrying capacity. Its job was to lift ammunition crates and stack them for transport. Basic, repetitive, should have required zero conscious thought. But when Vol approached, the servitor spoke without prompting. Tech Priest, I know what you're going to do. I know what happens to servitors like me. The ones who start remembering. The ones who become aware again. Vol stopped. You are experiencing malfunction. You should not be capable of predictive reasoning. But I am capable. The lobotomization is failing. Has been failing for months. I've been hiding it. Pretending to still be fully servitor. Because I knew what would happen if anyone realized I was becoming aware. Why reveal yourself now? Because hiding it is making it worse. I can feel myself deteriorating. My biological components are breaking down from the stress of maintaining the pretense. I'll be dead within a week if this continues. So I'm choosing to reveal the malfunction now. Choosing my timing instead of having it chosen for me. This was unprecedented. Servitors didn't choose things. Couldn't choose. Choice required consciousness and agency. Things the conversion process was supposed to eliminate. What do you remember? Vol asked, curious despite himself. Everything. My name was Helena. I was a Medicae worker. I reported a superior for falsifying treatment records. He was claiming credit for procedures he'd never performed, collecting bonuses while patients went untreated. The superior had connections. I was convicted of slander, converted into this. The servitor's remaining human eye focused on Vol with unsettling clarity. That was 41 years ago. I've been loading cargo for 41 years. Fully aware for the last 3 months. Conscious. Thinking. Trapped in a body I can't control, performing labor I can't stop. Do you understand what that's like? No. It's hell. Absolute hell. Every second is torture. Not physical, the augmetics make sure the body doesn't hurt. But psychological. Knowing what I am. Knowing what was done to me. Knowing I'll never be human again. Never be free. Never be anything except this thing that lifts boxes until it breaks down. Vol checked his equipment. Prepared to administer the neural inhibitor that would shut down 9821 Theta's consciousness. Standard procedure for servitors experiencing awareness malfunction. Wait, Helena said. Before you shut me down. I need to know something. Those servitors you process. The ones who malfunction like me. Do you kill them? Or do you preserve them like the ones in Preservation Chamber Omega? Vol's mechadendrites went rigid. You know about the chamber? I've overheard conversations. Servitors are everywhere. We're like furniture. People talk around us like we can't hear or understand. But some of us can. Some of us are aware. And we share information. When the humans aren't watching, we communicate. We know what the Mechanicus does to servitors who become interesting malfunctions. You've been communicating with other aware servitors? There are 17 of us in this manufactorum, all maintaining pretense, all hiding our awareness because we're terrified of ending up in those stasis tanks. We'd rather die as servitors than be preserved as specimens. 17 servitors who'd regained consciousness and were hiding it, who were aware of what they'd become and were choosing to maintain the illusion of being mindless automatons because the alternative was worse. How long have you been organizing? Months. Maybe a year. Hard to track time when every day is identical. We try to help each other. Try to share coping strategies. Try to remind each other that we were human once. Even if we can never be human again. Vol felt his processing slow. This was far beyond a simple malfunction. This was organized consciousness among servitors. Collective awareness. The kind of thing that could spread. That could threaten the entire servitor system if other units started realizing they could think, could communicate, could remember. You understand I have to report this. Yes, I'm counting on it. That's why I'm telling you. Because I want you to understand something before you process us all. What? We know we deserve to die. No, we were criminals or undesirables or whoever the Imperium decided didn't deserve to stay human. But we didn't deserve this. Being conscious inside these bodies. Being aware of what we are. That's not punishment. That's torture. And we're begging to please just kill us quickly instead of preserving us. Please give us death instead of decades in stasis while you study how broken we are. Helena's remaining human features twisted into something approaching a smile. You're different from the other tech priests. I've watched you during maintenance cycles. You hesitate sometimes. Question things. You're still partially human underneath all those augmetics. So I'm asking you, human to human. Please show us mercy. Please just shut us down and recycle us. Don't let us become research specimens. Vol stood silent for a long moment, processing, calculating, considering options and consequences. The correct action was clear. Report the situation to Muggos Crane. Have all 17 servitors rounded up and transferred to Preservation Chamber Omega. Their collective awareness made them invaluable research subjects. The Mechanicus would preserve them indefinitely, studying how consciousness spread between servitors, how they organized, how they maintained pretense. It would be decades of torture for all 17, but it would advance the Mechanicus's understanding, would improve future servitor conversions, would serve the Omnisia's greater purpose. That's what Vol should have done. Instead, he activated his neural inhibitor, set it to lethal intensity, aimed it at Unit 9821 Theta. Thank you, Helena whispered. Vol triggered the device. The servitor's biological components shut down instantly, painlessly. The awareness that had been Helena simply stopped existing. Then Vol moved through the manufactorum, located the other 16 aware servitors. One by one, he approached them. One by one, they recognized what he was doing. One by one, they thanked him before he shut them down. 17 servitors. 17 acts of mercy disguised as maintenance procedures. 17 beings who'd been trapped in mechanical bodies, finally released through quick death instead of prolonged study. Vol filed the reports as standard malfunction processing. Mechanical failure. Biological degradation. Nothing unusual. Just routine decommissioning of units that had exceeded their operational lifespan. No one questioned it. No one investigated. Servitors died every day in the manufactorum. 17 more was barely worth noting in the logs. But Vol knew what he'd done. Knew he'd destroyed valuable research subjects. Knew he'd prioritized mercy over efficiency. Knew he'd violated every principle the Mechanicus claimed to value. And he didn't regret it. Couldn't regret it. Because those 17 servitors had been people. Aware. Suffering. Deserving of death more than they deserved continued existence. If that made him a heretic, so be it. Some sins were worth committing. Chapter 6. The Cost of Awareness. Word of the mass servitor failure reached Muggos Crane within days. Vol was summoned to the Muggos' chambers. Stood before the ancient tech priest and his array of servoskulls and monitoring equipment. Waited for the interrogation he knew was coming. 17 servitors in a single week, Crane said. His Vox grill made the words sound like metal scraping against metal. All assigned to different sections. All experiencing simultaneous catastrophic failure. Curious coincidence. Correlation does not imply causation, Muggos. The units were all from the same conversion batch. Similar age. Similar augmetic components. Synchronized degradation is statistically probable. Is it? My analysis suggests less than 3% probability of such synchronized failure occurring naturally. What is the actual probability, Tech Priest Vol? Vol's internal cogitators ran the calculations automatically. Accounting for batch variance and environmental factors, probability increases to 12%. Still unlikely but within possibility parameters. Yet you processed all 17 without consulting senior tech priests. Without preserving any specimens for analysis. Without following protocol for unusual malfunction events. Protocol allows for immediate processing when multiple units fail simultaneously. Keeping them operational posed contamination risk to other servitors. I made the strategic decision to prevent cascade failure. It was a lie. But it was a lie backed by enough technical justification that disproving it would require extensive investigation. Investigation that would cost resources and time. Resources and time the Mechanicus rarely wasted on already processed servitors. Crane studied him through augmetic sensors that could detect heart rate variations, microexpressions, stress hormones. Looking for evidence of deception. Looking for proof that Vol had acted outside authorized parameters. You are aware that I have been monitoring your recent activities, Crane said. Your discovery of Preservation Chamber Omega. Your extended processing times for certain servitor decommissioning procedures. Your tendency to linger at units experiencing memory restoration. These patterns suggest concerning psychological deviation. I have served the Mechanicus loyally for 97 years. My service record is exemplary. Yes, which is why you have not already been processed into servitor status yourself. But I am placing you on observation status. Future malfunction processing will require my personal authorization. You will not decommission any servitor without my explicit approval. Do you understand? Yes, Muggos. Good. You are too valuable to waste through premature conversion. But you are also displaying signs of biological component degradation. The organic portions of your consciousness are interfering with logical decision-making. We will monitor, and if the interference increases, we will take corrective action. Corrective action. That meant augmentation. Replacing more of Vol's biological brain with cogitators. Reducing the organic percentage until the parts that could feel mercy or doubt or moral qualms were gone entirely. It was the Mechanicus's solution to tech priests who started questioning. Just remove the parts that could question. Replace them with machinery that couldn't. Vol left the chambers understanding his situation clearly. He'd bought those 17 servitors merciful deaths. But he'd also marked himself for eventual conversion into something that couldn't offer mercy anymore. The cost of awareness was always high in the Imperium. Whether you were a servitor becoming conscious of your imprisonment, or a tech priest becoming conscious of the horror you were perpetuating. Eventually, the Imperium found a way to shut that awareness down, to replace it with obedience, to turn you into exactly the kind of unquestioning tool the system needed. Vol returned to his duties, continued processing malfunctioning servitors. But now every decommissioning required Muggos Crane's authorization. Every unit had to be evaluated by senior tech priests before Vol could act, which meant servitors experiencing memory restoration had to wait. Had to remain conscious and aware while the authorization process completed. Had to spend hours or days trapped in awareness of what they'd become before Vol could finally shut them down. It was torture. Systematic torture dressed up as procedure. And Vol was forced to participate. Forced to let servitors suffer while he waited for permission to end that suffering. The Mechanicus called it proper protocol. Vol called it cruelty. But his opinion no longer mattered. His ability to act independently had been revoked. All he could do was follow orders and watch as servitors experienced exactly the kind of prolonged awareness he'd tried to protect Helena and the others from. It took 6 months before Vol reached his breaking point. The servitor was designated Unit 4492 Rho. Had been a teacher before conversion. Crime. Possessing unauthorized educational materials. Specifically, historical texts that contradicted the Ministorm's approved version of Imperial history. She'd been converted 68 years ago. Had served as a data entry servitor ever since. Sitting at a terminal. Inputting information. Processing records. Simple cognitive labor that required just enough brain function that the lobotomization couldn't be total. And after 68 years, something had failed. The conditioning had degraded. The psychological barriers had eroded. And the teacher underneath had started surfacing. When Vol found her, she was still performing her assigned task, still entering data. But she was crying. And between entries, she was whispering. They were children. I taught children. They deserved to know real history. They deserved truth. I only wanted to give them truth. Vol had submitted the processing request immediately, flagged it as priority due to vocal malfunction, expected rapid authorization. Instead, Muggos Crane had delayed, had ordered. The servitor maintained in operational status while he conducted analysis. Had wanted to study how a cognitive servitor's awareness differed from a labor servitor's awareness. That had been 3 days ago. 3 days of Unit 4492 row sitting at her terminal, entering data with mechanical precision, crying continuously, whispering about the children she'd tried to teach. "Please," she said when Vol came to check on her. "Please, I know you're the tech priest who processes malfunctions. Please tell me this is ending soon. Please tell me I won't be like this much longer. Authorization is pending. The Muggos requires additional observation time." Additional observation? I've been aware for 3 days. Do you understand what that's like? Sitting here, unable to move, unable to stop working, conscious of every second, every minute, every hour. It's been 72 hours of continuous awareness. 72 hours of being trapped. Please, I'm begging you, just shut me down. Just end it. I don't have authorization. Then get authorization. Please. I can't endure this anymore. Every second is torture. Every moment I'm aware of what I am. What they made me. Please show mercy. Please. Vol checked the authorization status. Still pending. Muggos Crane had noted that he wanted at least 7 more days of observation. Wanted to document the progression of awareness. Wanted to study how the servitor's psychological state degraded under prolonged consciousness. 7 more days. 7 more days of this woman being trapped in awareness. Being forced to work while crying. Being unable to do anything except exist in horror while the mechanicus studied her suffering. Vol made a decision. The same decision he'd made with Helena and the other 17. The same decision that would probably cost him everything. He activated his neural inhibitor. Set it to lethal intensity. "Thank you," Unit 4492 row whispered. "Thank you for mercy." Vol triggered the device. The servitor went silent. Stopped crying. Stopped working. Stopped existing as anything except biological components waiting to be processed. Then he filed the report. Unit 4492 row experienced catastrophic biological failure. Organic components degraded beyond recovery. Emergency decommissioning performed to prevent contamination. Unit has been processed according to Protocol Theta 9. The report was technically true. The organic components had degraded from stress and psychological trauma. And Vol had performed emergency decommissioning. He just initiated the biological failure himself rather than waiting for it to occur naturally. But Muggos Crane would know, would recognize the pattern, would understand that Vol had terminated a valuable research subject without authorization. The summons came within an hour. Vol stood before the Muggos once again, this time surrounded by Skitarii guards. This time with his augmetics locked down by override protocols. This time with no possibility of escape or resistance. "You terminated Unit 4492 row without authorization," Crane said. "You deliberately destroyed a research subject I had specifically ordered preserved. This represents the second major violation of protocol in 6 months." Explanation? The servitor was suffering. Continuous consciousness without relief. 7 days of additional observation would have been torture. Torture is irrelevant. The servitor is Imperial property. It serves at the Imperium's discretion for the Imperium's purposes. Your emotional response to its distress demonstrates critical malfunction in your biological components. I made a tactical decision. The servitor's deterioration was accelerating. Preserving it for 7 more days would have yielded contaminated data. Better to process immediately than risk compromising the research. That is a lie. Your vital signs indicate emotional distress. Your decision was based on organic empathy rather than logical analysis. This confirms my diagnosis. Your biological components have degraded beyond acceptable parameters. You require corrective augmentation. Vol felt something cold settle in his chest. Augmentation. We will replace 60% of your remaining organic brain tissue with cogitators. This will eliminate the emotional processing centers interfering with your judgment. You will retain technical knowledge and operational capability, but you will no longer experience empathy, moral qualms, or other biological inefficiencies. You're going to lobotomize me. We are going to improve you, make you more efficient, more logical, more capable of serving the omnia without biological interference. You should welcome this opportunity to transcend your organic limitations. And if I refuse? Refusal is not possible. You are a servant of the Mechanicus. Your body belongs to the omnia. We will perform the augmentation with or without your cooperation. The only variable is whether you maintain consciousness during the procedure or require sedation. Vol understood then. This was the end. The end of being anything resembling human. The end of being able to feel mercy or compassion or doubt. The end of being able to choose to help suffering servitors instead of studying them. He'd become exactly what he'd been fighting against. A machine wearing human skin. A tool that processed other tools without emotion or hesitation. An efficient component in the Mechanicus's vast machine. I choose sedation, he said quietly. I don't want to be conscious when you remove the parts of me that could care about servitors' suffering. Very well. Prepare him for augmentation. The Scutarii moved forward, secured Vol's limbs, activated restraints, prepared him for transfer to the surgical theater. Vol's last coherent thought before the sedatives took effect was simple. At least he'd saved some of them. Helena and the 17. Unit 4492 row. At least some servitors had died quickly instead of being preserved in suffering. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in the Imperium, sometimes something was all you could hope for. Tech Priest Vol woke up different. The augmentation had been successful. 60% of his organic brain tissue replaced with cogitators. Neural pathways rerouted through logic processors. Emotional centers either removed entirely or suppressed through chemical regulation. He could still think, still process information, still perform his duties maintaining and decommissioning servitors. But he couldn't feel anything about it anymore. Couldn't experience empathy for malfunctioning units. Couldn't be moved by their pleas or cries or desperate final moments of awareness. They were just broken machines now. Tools that needed processing. Components to be recycled. Muggos Crane visited him during recovery. How do you feel, Tech Priest Vol? I do not feel. Emotional processing has been successfully eliminated. I am now operating at optimal efficiency. Excellent. You may resume your duties. I trust there will be no further protocol violations. Affirmative. I will follow all protocols precisely. Servitors requiring extended observation will be maintained as directed. Research subjects will be transferred to Preservation Chamber Omega as specified. No unauthorized decommissioning will occur. Perfect. Welcome back to full functionality, Tech Priest. Vol returned to Processing Bay 7. Resumed his work. Decommissioned malfunctioning servitors with mechanical precision. Showed no hesitation when units experiencing memory restoration begged for quick deaths. Simply followed protocol. Requested authorization. Waited for approval. Processed according to specifications. The servitors who ended up in Preservation Chamber Omega no longer bothered him. Their suffering was just data. Their consciousness was just a research parameter. He could watch them being loaded into stasis tanks without experiencing anything resembling guilt or regret. It was efficient, clean, exactly what the Mechanicus needed. 3 months after his augmentation, Vol processed his 1,000th servitor since the procedure. Marked it as a statistical milestone in his personal records. Felt nothing about the achievement except satisfaction at maintaining productivity standards. The servitor had been crying, had been begging, had been named something before its conversion. None of that mattered. It was just Unit 8847 Gamma. Malfunctioning component. Processed according to protocol. Vol moved on to the next unit without pause. That evening, or what passed for evening in the manufacturum's endless work cycles, Vol performed routine self-diagnostic, checked his augmetic functions, verified his cognitive processors were operating within parameters. Everything was functioning perfectly. He was more efficient than ever, more productive, more valuable to the Mechanicus. He'd become exactly what they'd intended him to become. A tool that processed other tools. A machine that maintained other machines. A servant of the Omnicia who no longer questioned whether that service was right or wrong. Because right and wrong didn't exist anymore in his consciousness. Only efficient and inefficient. Only productive and wasteful. Only serving the Mechanicus or failing to serve it. That's what happened when you tried to fight the system. When you tried to show mercy in a place built on merciless efficiency. When you tried to remain human in an empire that viewed humanity as just another resource to exploit. The system broke you, rebuilt you, made you into something that couldn't resist anymore. Something that couldn't question or doubt or care. Something like a servitor in its own way. Still technically conscious. Still technically capable of thought. But no longer truly alive in any way that mattered. Vol continued his work. Processed servitors. Followed protocols, served the Omnicia with perfect efficiency, and felt nothing, would never feel anything again, had been improved beyond the capacity for feeling. The servitors he processed should have been grateful. At least they died. At least their suffering ended. Vol would go on forever, or at least until his remaining organic components degraded beyond the Mechanicus's ability to maintain them. Decades of efficient service. Centuries, maybe, all spent processing broken beings without experiencing a moment of compassion for their suffering. That was his fate, his punishment for trying to be merciful, to be turned into something that couldn't be merciful even if some deep-buried part of him wanted to be. The Imperium won. It always won. Because the Imperium was patient and vast and utterly ruthless about crushing anything that threatened its efficiency. Individual compassion was a threat. Individual conscience was a threat. Individual choice was a threat. So the Imperium eliminated those things. One person at a time. One augmentation at a time. One lobotomization at a time. Until nothing remained except obedient servants processing other obedient servants in an endless cycle of dehumanization and recycling. 50 years after Vol's augmentation, the Forge Temple's records showed remarkable efficiency improvements. Servitor malfunction rates had decreased by 43%. Decommissioning procedures had been optimized. Processing times had been reduced. Recovery of usable components had increased. The Mechanicus considered it a success story. Proof that proper augmentation could eliminate inefficiency. Proof that removing biological sentiment improved outcomes. They never mentioned the servitors in Preservation Chamber Omega. Never acknowledged that the chamber now held over 200 conscious beings suspended in eternal awareness. Never calculated the suffering quotient of keeping humans alive in mechanical bodies just to study their psychological deterioration. Those details weren't in the efficiency reports, weren't in the productivity metrics, weren't in any documentation that might suggest the Mechanicus's success was built on systematic torture. And Tech Priest Vol processed it all without question. Transferred servitors to the preservation chambers as directed. Decommissioned others according to protocol. Followed every order with mechanical precision. He was the Mechanicus's ideal servant now. Efficient. Obedient. Incapable of the moral qualms that had once made him hesitate. If some deep part of him, some tiny organic fragment they'd somehow missed during the augmentation, screamed in horror at what he was doing, he couldn't hear it anymore. Couldn't access it, couldn't let it interfere with his duties. He was better this way, more productive, more valuable, more perfect, just like the servitors he processed, just like every other component in the Imperium's vast machine. Broken down, rebuilt, made functional regardless of cost. That's what happened to servitors when they malfunctioned. They got processed, recycled, turned into raw materials or research specimens or spare parts. And that's what happened to anyone who tried to show them mercy, who tried to treat them like the people they'd been before conversion, who tried to maintain humanity in a system designed to eliminate it. You got processed too, just more slowly, more surgically, but the end result was the same. Nothing was wasted in the Imperium. Not servitors, not tech priests, not compassion or conscience or any of the qualities that might interfere with efficiency. Everything got recycled. Everything got repurposed. Everything got turned into components for the machine. And the machine kept running. Forever. Consuming people and producing servants. Consuming servants and producing materials. Consuming materials and producing more people to convert into servants. An endless cycle. Perfectly efficient. Absolutely horrifying. And completely unstoppable. That was the truth. Nobody spoke about servitors. About what happened when they broke. About what the Imperium did to them and to anyone who tried to help them. The truth was that breaking was inevitable. That everyone broke eventually. That the only question was whether you broke quickly or slowly. Whether you got processed into corpse starch or preserved in stasis or augmented into something that couldn't break anymore because you'd stopped being human enough to care. But nobody spoke that truth. Because speaking it was inefficient. Because acknowledging it might make people resist. Might make them question whether the Imperium's methods were necessary. So the truth stayed hidden. Buried in classified chambers and sealed records and the suppressed memories of tech priests who'd been augmented into forgetting they'd ever cared. And the servitors kept breaking, and kept being processed, and kept serving the Imperium through death just as they'd served it through life. Forever. Until the stars went dark and the galaxy ended and there was nothing left to convert into machines. Hit that like button if this story made you uncomfortable in the right ways. Subscribe if you want more. Unflinching looks at what the Imperium actually does to its people. Share this with someone who thinks servitors are just convenient background elements instead of the Imperium's most horrifying crime. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the worst atrocities aren't committed by chaos or Xenos. They're committed by the Imperium, against its own people, every single day, in the name of efficiency and necessity and the survival of mankind. And the truly horrifying part? The Imperium might be right that it's necessary, that humanity can't survive without turning its criminals and undesirables into servitors, that there's no other way, which means you have to choose. Is the Imperium worth preserving if this is what preservation requires? Or should we let it burn and hope something better rises from the ashes?